So this video is part 2 to Ellen White, Past and Present Truth. And we're bringing her quote that we talked about, where she talked about even unto even, and showing that that was actually a 2-day period. And we're going to show it here in the manna. We're going to show it from the manna. We're going to show it in the Passover. And we can also see it in the creation account, but there's so much to the manna. I just want to show the manna and how it shows that the Sabbath day is not Saturday, it's not Sunday, it's not any of those days. And this is going to be amazing. And this is a huge part of the shaking. So I'm just going to read 2 verses dealing with the shaking, just to give some context to this. So this is from Ellen White, and she says, "The shaking of God blows away multitudes like dry leaves. Prosperity multiplies a mass of professors. Adversity purges them out of the church. They are a class whose spirits are not satisfied with God. They go out from us because they are not of us. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word," so that's the word of God, "many are offended." And this is what we're going to find. People are going to be offended by the Bible. She goes on in another quote where she says, "The Spirit of God has illuminated every page of Holy Writ, but there are those upon whom it makes little impression because it is imperfectly understood. When the shaking comes by the introduction of false theories," so false theories is to deny the Word of God, deny what Ellen White talked about, to deny what I'm going to show with the manna, okay, false theories. So she says, by the introduction of false theories, these surface readers anchor nowhere and are like shifting sand. They slide into any position that suits the tenor of their feelings of bitterness. I am so grateful that the Word of God is plain and clear when our hearts are in harmony with it. Without the Word, what a starving people we would be in this world, which is a desolate wilderness to the soul. But now springs of water break out in the desert. We may drink of the living streams which proceed from the throne of God. So the things I want to point out from these 3 quotes, the big thing is that the shaking blows away multitudes. This is in our church. It blows away multitudes like dry leaves. And what does she say? It's because of the Word of God. Okay? So if you haven't watched my video before this, you need to go back and watch my previous video where it shows how Ellen White kept the Sabbath, why she kept the Sabbath, what she was told about the Sabbath. And this is, and Ellen White only teaches the true 7-day Sabbath, that it is not Saturday, that it is not Sunday, just like the Bible doesn't teach that it's Saturday or Sunday. And she says God's Spirit illuminates every page of Holy Writ. But the only reason why people don't believe the Bible is because it makes little impression, because it is imperfectly understood. Okay, so we know we're supposed to keep the 7-day Sabbath, but we've never had a Bible verse ever to actually show what day was the Sabbath until recently. So, and by the introduction of false theories, the people that are being blown away like dry leaves are going to bring in everything they can to try to deny the Word of God. And the reason why they do that is because the Word of God is plain and clear, and their hearts are not in harmony with it. But the people that are following the Word, their hearts are in harmony with the Word because they follow the Word of God. Jesus is the Word. He is a good shepherd, and we're supposed to follow the Word. But today, we've done away with the Word. We say that, oh, well, we need to go to the Greek and the Hebrew, and we need to, and these things are misinterpreted, when Ellen White specifically tells us that the Bible, the specific Bible in her day, was perfect and as God wanted it. That very Bible she had. Okay, so right now, this last part of the quote where she says, "But now springs of water break out in the desert." We've been in a desert, and now the springs of water are breaking out. So we've seen that the Sabbath goes over 2 days. Now we're going to see it from the manna. So let's do a little recap here. We're told that Ellen White was told that we're to keep the Sabbath from even unto even. It's the only information on how we're to keep the Sabbath. Okay? And so we go to Leviticus 23. This is where we find the only spot in the Bible where it says even unto even. And if we start looking at verse 26, 26. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, In the 10th day of the 7th month shall be a day of atonement. Okay, and then it goes da 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 da. And it says in verse 32, It shall be a Sabbath of rest. And it says, You shall afflict your souls. Okay, now this is recap. If you haven't watched my first video, you need to go back and watch the first video because it gives perfect context to all this. And then it says, In the 9th day of the month at even, from even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. So all of a sudden, you're celebrating the Sabbath from the 9th day to the 10th day of the month. It is going through both days at the same time. So you have half of the 9th day of the month and half of the 10th day of the month. Okay? And we're going to see this in the manna. But first, let's go to where Ellen White was told to look. When she asked about even and why we needed to change Sabbath, the angels told her to go to the rise of the first Sabbath, which is in the Genesis account. So let's look at Genesis 1. And all of a sudden we go and we see, hey, the Sabbath isn't in Genesis 1. And it ends after man was created. It talks about the food. Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed. And then it says, And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And evening and morning were the 6th day. Okay, so the 7th day has to come right after that. And it says, let's make this a little bit bigger. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all the work which God had made. Okay, first thing to notice is there was no even, and it doesn't say even, evening and morning were the 7th day. That is just completely missing. There is no evening to start the 7th day. And the reason being, now in the original, there would have been. But this is telling us about something prophetic. And it's teaching about the end of the world. But I'm not going to get into that. I want to keep it simple. But I want to show here it says, And on the 7th day God ended his work. Wait a minute. If God ended his work on the 7th day, that means he was working on the 7th day, which he had made. So I often like to put it in different words where it say, let's just say, and on the 7th day, so let's just say this is Saturday, and on Saturday, Bill ended his work which he had made cabinets, and he rested on the Saturday from all the cabinets which he had made. Well, that made no sense, because if Bill ended his work on the Saturday, then he was working on the Saturday. And it doesn't say 6th day. It says 7th day. So in the real world, if you were to tell somebody, oh yeah, I finished building all the cabinets on Saturday, they would believe that you did it on Saturday. And then you say, no, I didn't say Saturday. I said Friday. And you'd be like, no, you said Saturday. You did not say Friday. Okay, we got to use common sense here. Okay, this is plain English. In English, this means that person was working on that day. You cannot get around it and be honest. If you say anything else, you are dishonest, and that's just how it is. You are not an honest person. This says, on the 7th day, God ended his work. Okay? And then he rested. But what this is showing is that there's, I want to say, kind of not overlapping calendars, but there's an overlap in the week that we know. And the reason being, I'll just say it, is that the new moon starts every month and resets the Sabbath day. So you would have a new moon, and all of a sudden you'd have 7 days later, God ended his work, which would be the 6th day of the work week, because the new moon day is not a work day. Okay, so to give a little bit of context to what we're talking about, what we're reading about, I want to show something neat from Psalms 81. And this is going to give us some history to give us a little bit of understanding of what is actually happening here. So this is David writing this, but he's writing about something historical. He says, Blow the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel and a law of the God of Jacob. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through a land of Egypt, where I heard a language that I understood not. I removed his shoulder from the burden. His hands were delivered from the pots. So here it says, hey, Joseph was even in slavery there I had sent Joseph there, right? He ordained in Joseph for a testimony. So he went there to teach him specifically about the new moon. This is God's calendar. Okay. Now, a lot of people might say, oh, it was a 30-day calendar from the creation, but it wasn't. The Bible clearly shows that even in the time of Noah, if you actually do what it says, where you add instead of multiplying the days, it shows you that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. When God started the very first day, he also started the very first week, he also started the very first month, and he also started the very first year, all on that same single day. But there's a little nuance to it. So I just want to show something here. If we go to Leviticus 23, it also shows that it says, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, in the first day of the month, right? So in the first day of the seventh, in the 7th moon, so in the 7th moon or 7th month, you shall have a Sabbath, just like a 7th-day Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets. So it says specifically that this was a memorial of blowing of trumpets. And if you go back, even from Sinai, you can't find trumpets being blown. But when you take the figurative meaning of the word, all of a sudden you realize it is the voice of God. So when God said, let there be light, boom, you had your first trumpet. Second day of creation, when God spoke, second trumpet. Third day of creation, third trumpet, and so on. And this is why when we go back here, when it says blow the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day, this feast day was already in existence before that time. And Joseph was sent there. It wasn't to teach them about God's calendar per se, but about his Sabbath, which was what was more important. Because the new moon day, we're going to see with the manna, and everywhere in the Bible after that, you'll see it, that the Sabbath always follows the new moon. So in other words, you would have the new moon, then you'd have 6 working days Sabbath, and the Sabbath would land on the 8th day. And even in the history of the Egyptians, you can see that they kept a solar calendar when Joseph got there. And as soon as when Joseph got there, all of a sudden they started keeping a calendar that followed the new moon. The reason being is that when everybody was coming to Joseph, they had to know when the Sabbath was. And the only way to do it was to understand the new moon. And this is why he ended his work on the 7th day, and then God rested on the 7th day, which is of the work week, from all the work that he had made. So this is showing complete harmony between the two. This is one of the out of the 3 thus saith the Lord. This one's the most vague one there is, that show when the Sabbath is from the Bible. So now I want to take us to the manna. And from the manna, we're going to see that this shows the exact same thing. The manna is going to show that the Sabbath is impossible to be Friday or Saturday or Sunday. And this is all in complete harmony with the Bible. It's all in complete harmony with Ellen White's writings. And we have plain Bible verses that actually say when the Sabbath day is. But one of the first things that I want to show through about the manna is that the Sabbath was being kept before the Passover by the Jewish people. Okay, I seen it in the Bible, and go figure, of course, Ellen White's going to talk about it too, because it's necessary for us to believe the Bible to have her words. Otherwise, we don't believe the Bible. Now, one thing I do want to talk about expressly right now first is that when we think of the Passover, Jesus was a Passover lamb, but Jesus was also the destroying angel. So the Passover was not just when the lamb was slain. The Passover was when Jesus actually passed over the Jewish people. It was that whole night. So it was a whole 12-hour period that was the Passover, give or take a few hours. It was not just the slaying of the lamb. So when the Passover was on the 14th day of the first month, that included the angel, which was Jesus, the I can't remember what it was called, the angel of destruction, or the destroying angel was actually Jesus at that time. He went through all those homes. He slayed all the firstborn. Before we go any further, I want to just give some context to the Passover so that we have some context to it I'm going to do it from the Bible first, then I'm going to show it from Ellen White. Okay, so this is Ellen White talking about that the Sabbath was actually kept before the Passover. She says, and this is in Patriarchs and Prophets, okay? So it's a very prominent book of hers, and it's a perfect spot for her to put it. She puts everything about teaching about the Sabbath and Desire of Ages, Patriarchs and Prophets and Kings in the 5 most popular books that she actually wrote. She actually has all the answers for where the Sabbath is to point to it, because she teaches that the Sabbath is not Saturday or Sunday. Okay, now let's take some of these things first so we can see them. Tidings of them and of the interest that they were exciting among the people had already reached the king. His answer was kindled. Wherefore do ye, Moses and Aaron, let, which is hinder, the people from their works? He said, Get ye unto your burdens. Already the kingdom had suffered loss by the interference of these strangers. At thought of this, he added, Behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. In their bondage, the Israelites had to some extent lost the knowledge of God's law, and they had departed from his precepts. The Sabbath had been generally disregarded, and the exactions of the taskmakers made its observance apparently impossible. But Moses had shown his people that obedience to God was the first condition of deliverance, and the efforts made to restore the observance of the Sabbath had come to the notice of the oppressors. Okay, so that's Patriarchs and Prophets. She just tells us plainly that, hey, Moses came, he's teaching them to keep the Sabbath better than what they were doing already. Now let's also find this in Prophets and Kings, where she says, at the time of the Exodus, the Sabbath was brought prominently before the people of God. While in Egypt, the taskmasters had attempted to force them to labor on the Sabbath by increasing the amount of work required each week. But the Israelites were delivered from bondage and brought to a place where they might observe unmolested all the precepts of the Lord. Okay, so that's just amazing. She just says it outrightly. They were keeping the Sabbath while in Egypt before they left Egypt. Okay, so we should be able to see this somewhere in their history. And of course we do. So we find it in Exodus 5, and it says, And Pharaoh said, Behold, the people of the land now are many, and ye make them rest from their burdens. Okay, so right there was our first verse that actually says, hey, Moses was keeping them from their burdens. Now, of course, that seems very vague and ambiguous. So we need it in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So I had found another Bible verse for it too. But it was in Nehemiah, which is amazing because you'd think, oh, you'd find it in the first 5 books of Moses that he actually wrote. But no, we actually see it in Nehemiah. It says, And madest known unto them thy holy Sabbath, and commandest them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant. Okay, so the reason why I attribute this to before the law was given, because it says it was by the hand of Moses, but it says, And madest known unto them thy holy Sabbath. Well, God spoke to all the people about his holy Sabbath, and it didn't say God spoke it. It was made known unto them from Moses. So I'm saying that this verse is referring to the time before the law was even given at Sinai. Because Moses, he was with Jethro, who was a priest of the Most High God, who kept the Sabbath. So when Moses came out of Egypt, he was with Jethro. He was with the priest of God. And he learned about his statutes and precepts and the Sabbath before he even went back to Egypt. He went back to Egypt, he started teaching them, and then God went and told him the 10 Commandments himself. And then God gave it to Moses in other writings as well. But God spoke to them first. So I'm saying that Nehemiah was probably referring back to before that time, just because otherwise he would have attributed the Sabbath to God alone. But he attributed it to Moses first. So it's just kind of something beautiful I found. So let's take a look at some of the things that it actually says in the Bible about the Passover to give us some clues as to, do we see a Sabbath here? Do we not see a Sabbath? And these are going to give us clues as to the Sabbath being kept. And then it's going to give us clues as to things we need to look for with the manna. And then we're going to take them both, we're going to put them together, and we're going to see that, hey, God's Sabbath follows the new moon every month. Okay? That's just what it is. The new moon resets the Sabbath, and then you have a continuous 7-day cycle 6 working day Sabbath, 6 working day Sabbath, 6 working day Sabbath, 6 working day Sabbath. New moon resets when the Sabbath is. 6 working day Sabbath, 6 working day Sabbath. Okay, it's a continuous cycle from this creation of the world. Okay, so this is absolutely beautiful. The Bible and Ellen White are so in harmony. Ellen White she didn't bring all of her writings together in her mind. But I tell you, when somebody actually brings this to Ellen White, if it takes more than 20 minutes for her to understand when the Sabbath is, I'll be amazed. I think somebody should just say, "Hey, Ellen White, did you know the Sabbath followed the new moon?" She goes, "Ah, I was wondering." That's how I look at her saying it. It's just like, "Oh, it was right there." And everything would just sink right in together for her right away. I think that's how it's going to happen. Not even going to take 2 minutes. It's just going to be a few seconds, and she'll understand it. Everyone else, all our pioneers, 20 minutes, they should have it. It is that simple. Okay. Let's look at Exodus 12, because this is where we start learning about the Passover. But we must remember that we're supposed to go different places in our Bible to understand things. So we're going to start in Exodus 12, verse 8, and it says, "And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs, and they shall eat it. Not raw, not sodden at all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the putenance thereof. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire." Okay, first thing I want to point out is that it says, "You shall let nothing remain of it until the morning." Okay, so recognize this is morning. The Israelites are not going to leave Egypt on the night that the Passover angel, which was Jesus Christ, God himself, who actually says, "I am going to go through myself and kill all these people." Okay, and it says, "That which remaineth of it in the morning ye shall burn with fire." So in the morning they had to burn this with fire. Okay, this is our first clue. Exodus 12, verse 22 brings this more into perspective. It says, "And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning." Okay, what did it just say here? And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning. What happens if somebody goes out of the door of their house? Okay, did only the firstborn have to be in that house, or did they all have to be in that house? Okay, so whenever the Bible talks about Moses being called out to Pharaoh, did we all of a sudden see Miriam die when Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh? Or did they stay and follow the commandments of the Lord to stay in their house at that time? Okay, they were obedient to God. Miriam was still alive later on, so we know Moses and Aaron didn't went out. And even though the cry went out at midnight, it did not mean that anybody was allowed to go out of their house, because they had no idea the time period of the death angel. They had no idea how long the death angel would be there. The only thing that we know about the death angel was that it was at night. And the cry went out at midnight. So all of a sudden, at midnight, people are finding dead people in their homes. It's not like at midnight, God just says, boom, right? God went door to door to door, and he was waiting to see if the Israelites would go out, and he would slay them as well if they went outside of their doors before morning as he had commanded them. Okay, this is no different than with Adam and Eve. Okay, let's bring a little bit more information into place here. In Exodus 12, verse 11, it says, "And ye shall eat it with your loins girded, and your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute this judgment. I am the Lord." So God said, this night, you weren't going out of your door that night. That whole night, there was a death decree going on. You go out the door, a firstborn in your home is going to die. If Moses would have went out the door, his firstborn probably would have died. Or if Aaron would have went out, if he had children, his firstborn might have died. Okay, let's bring in the verses why everybody has this wrong. It says in Exodus 12, verse 30, "And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not one house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up, and get ye forth from among the people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go and serve the Lord, as ye have said. Okay, so here it just says that, hey, Pharaoh rose up in the night, him and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, and there was not a house with one dead. And then it says, and he called for Moses and Aaron by night. One thing that the Bible is famous for is often placing things in different time periods, but not giving super good context for it until you go through your Bible to find the context to see that there's a separation. God does this on purpose because he wants a people that love him, that have a relationship with him. And people that are surface readers, that just read for the sake of reading and think that they're saved, they're not saved. God says, hey, you want a relationship with me? Read of me. And as you read your Bible, you're going to read, and I'm going to give you answers, and it's going to open up passages to you that you had never seen before. So now after saying that, let's bring in the Bible verses that give this context so we can see that this was 2 separate days. We go to Numbers 33 to find this, and we're going to read Numbers 33 verses 3 and 4. And it says, And they departed from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month, so not the 14th, on the 15th day they left, on the morrow after the Passover. So this is the day after the Passover. The children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. For the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, which the Lord had smitten among them, upon their gods also, and the Lord executed judgments. So what did that just say? They had buried their dead. Okay, the death angel was going through the land. People were dying. The death angel still going from house to house at midnight. Okay, they're all in terror. They're all in fear. They knew that on this day or on this night, this was going to happen. Are they going to go out and bury their dead in the middle of the night and then still call Moses and Aaron, which weren't going to leave their homes anyway? And this is not what happened. Okay. Now I want to read Deuteronomy 16 verse 1 because we need to know for sure that they went out at night. Okay? So in Deuteronomy 16 verse 1, so on the 15th day, remember we just read in Numbers 33, it was on the 15th day, on the day after the Passover, the children went out with a high hand. And it says in Deuteronomy 16 verse 1, Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. For in the month of the Abib, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Here it is, plain as day. They left at night. They left on the 15th day, the day after the Passover, as the Bible says, after they'd buried all their family. Okay, so this is showing that, hey, the children of Israel prepared for the Passover. This is where preparation day comes from. And we often talk about preparation day, that we need to be prepared for the Sabbath. We're supposed to guard the edges of the Sabbath. And we don't have any idea why. We have no idea where the preparation day actually came from. But it came from the Passover. And this is why the Jewish people actually probably believe that they were given the Sabbath alone and that people before them didn't have the Sabbath, that it wasn't from creation and it was just given to them alone from that time period on. And this is what the Roman Catholics believe too. And almost every Protestant denomination believes that Saturday was given to just the Jewish people alone. But God, in his mercy, through Ellen White, is opening this up to us to see that the Sabbath is not on one day, it's on 2 days. So it started, you have the preparation, and then you have the night comes, and this is the start of the Sabbath. There's no more working to be done. So some people might say, well, they're cooking. But who was cooking? It was the priest of the home that was doing it. So the priest in the temple, they make bread on the Sabbath day. That is part of their job. They are to work on the Sabbath. And the person that was supposed to slay the lamb, that was supposed to do the doorposts and everything like that, and that needed to cook the lamb, was the priest of the home. They were the ones that were doing it. It's symbolic. The symbolism is beautiful. You can look deeper into that yourself. So they were allowed to do all these things. Anyone else? No. And they needed to be prepared because right after the Sabbath, they're going to leave. at night. So the Sabbath is going to be over. It's going to be night. And then Moses and Aaron are going to be called. And they're already prepared and ready to go. And then they still, after that time, they still spoil Egypt. I was trying to think of the word. They still spoil Egypt even after that time. So it's not like on that night all these things happen, because the Passover, the death angel came through. Moses and Aaron weren't allowed to leave their homes. To say that they leave their homes meant that they broke the commandments of God. We're going to see all this through Ellen White. Okay, and then they still would have been commanded to leave. They still would have had to spoil Egypt. All these things still had to happen, but this is not how it worked. The Bible is just abundantly clear. I only brought in a few verses, but if you read it all, you can go into Deuteronomy, in Numbers, in Exodus. It's all laid out to be seen that you had the Passover. It was one 24-hour period, and then you have the 15th day is another 24-hour period. But the Sabbath portion of it was from the 6th day at sunset to the 7th day at sunset. And after sunset, even though it's still the Sabbath day, when it gets dark, they were allowed to leave. So the Sabbath period we keep, as Ellen White said, is from even unto even over a 2-day period. And we see this right here. Okay, let's start. Oh, I want to bring in a little bit more Bible first before I bring in Ellen White to confirm all this. So even at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, if you look really closely at it, it's an amazing. There's a lot of things here. I recommend, if anybody's actually thinking about this, go back to my original Sabbath playlist and look at it, and it's going to show so many more things. The whole Bible only talks about the Sabbath following the new moon. It is never this imaginary Saturday, which is honoring the papacy, right? We don't realize that this is in honor of the papacy because they created this 7th day that we keep today. Okay, so while our pioneers didn't know that, the body is still of Christ because they did it in innocence, believing it was the 7th day from creation. But Ellen White's writings teach that it's not. The Bible teaches that it's not. Okay, and I want to go to the Jesus crucifixion, and I want to just bring in a few verses that show this with Jesus' resurrection as well. So in Matthew 28, verse 1, it says, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week." So it's not the first day of the week yet. It's the end of the Sabbath, right? As it began to dawn towards the first day of the week. So the only name we have for like the Sabbath day is like the 7th day. So it's still the Sabbath day on the 7th day. That's the day that God rested, but it's a 24-hour period, but we kept the Sabbath. It's kind of interesting. But here it just says it's not yet the first day of the week. So came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. So John 20 verse 1 says, "The first day of the week came Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stones taken away from the sepulchre." Okay, an understanding of when even is. I believe I did this in the first video where I showed that evening can be morning or it can be night. It's a period of darkness. So when you have this in-between period of time, this in-between period of time is not really the 7th day. It's not really the first day. It's kind of both days mixed together, but it's not either one of those days, because in the creation account, it says when the sun is in the sky, that's a sign that it's a daytime. When you see the North Star, that's a sign that it's the nighttime. And that is how you differentiate night and day. Okay, so Mark 16 verse 1, and it says, "And when the Sabbath was past," so it's saying the Sabbath is past here. So we're getting that time. So when they got right there, it was still dark. The sun must have been just starting to pop up. That's the only way we can identify this, which makes sense because the sun was rising. It's still dark. Sun just peeks its head right at the moment they get there. It's probably the most beautiful thing in the world because Jesus is resurrected from the tomb. Okay? So it says, "When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and the Mary, mother of James and Salome, had brought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun." So how did I say it? It was yet dark, it was night, and it was morning at the same time at the rising of the sun. So one saying it's not the first day of the week, the other saying it is the first day of the week. And how do those mesh together? It's evening. It's a period between light and darkness. God just taught us right in the creation account. Okay, so now we're going to get into some heavy Ellen White, just to start proving a lot of these things. I'm just going to stick with the Passover, and I'm not going to go into Jesus' time because I want to show it strictly from the Passover, because there is one quote, and this is why it's taken me over 2 weeks to do this video, is because I was ready to do it. I've seen it from the Bible alone. It's so simple and easy from the Bible. But Ellen White sometimes just complicates things, where all of a sudden you'll find something, you're like, what in the world? How do I deal with this? And I found a quote from Ellen White that went against all her writings, that went against the Bible. I'm like, and then I tried looking into it, and I even tried, I'll explain it later. I have it in a separate portion that I'm going to add into this video. But I want to read one quote first from Ellen White to give some context, to show what I'm talking about. And she says, "And before the destroying angel was sent to slay the firstborn in Egypt, Moses was told to say to the children of Israel, 'Draw out and take ye a lamb according to your families, and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop, and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning, for the Lord will pass through the land of Egypt to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the 2 side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you.' And the blood on the door was to be a sign that the Israelites were God's people. He who failed to obey would suffer with the Egyptians." Okay, so it just says plain and simply, this is what Ellen White says, "None of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning." And then she says, "He who failed to obey would suffer with the Egyptians." So if you went out of your door before that time, they're going to suffer with the Egyptians. Moses was told specifically this. Is he going to follow a command by Pharaoh to come out of his house and go and talk to him that time when God just says don't? Who is he going to listen to? He's going to listen to God. So before I go into the Passover and the manna to show that Ellen White, the 2 days being one and being merged into one, I want to just take this one quote. Now, this one quote is what stopped me from actually putting out my next video, because all of a sudden I found this. I'm like, how can this be? Youth Instructor. So the book Youth Instructor threw me for a loop. Let's just read this quote for a second. It says, "The Passover was given to the ceremony in commemoration of the wonderful event of the Hebrews leaving Egypt the night they left Egypt. The destroying angel entered into every house and slew from the firstborn of the king upon his throne down to the firstborn of the lowliest slave. In one night the terror of death was borne by the avenging angel into every house of the Egyptians. No man could comfort one another, for every house had in it dead or the dying. The terror and sorrow were in every household." Okay, so this quote, I read it the way it should be written. So you have a period and a comma. They're in the wrong spots. I believe this is a copyist error, either accidentally or on purpose, because everyone believes it as the Hebrews leaving Egypt, period. The night they left Egypt, the destroying angel entered into every house. So this is how people believe it, right? And the problem with that is that's not what the Bible teaches, and it's not what Ellen White teaches. Ellen White actually teaches they did not leave that same night. The Bible says they did not leave that same night. And this is just an error that has been passed on from generation to generation. So even in this quote it says, "Terror and sorrow were in every household, and every house had it in it, dead or dying." They weren't even all they weren't all dead at that time. Okay, so there was a lot going on that night. They did not call Moses and Aaron to come out. But anyways, I want to look at this. How can this be? So I want to go into a little history here, which is interesting, because when I first seen this, I thought I should contact the Ellen White estate. So I sent them an email saying, hey, this goes against the Bible. And I gave probably 10 Bible passages and some Ellen White quotes that shows that this goes against what she taught, what the Bible teaches. But, as if they're going to answer me on this a little bit here, because this is one of those things where they're like, somebody's trying to just say she's a false prophet. But little do they know, I'm the person probably the most in the Seventh-day Adventist Church that upholds her writings. I don't know if anyone upholds her writings as much as I do. And for me, if this is how she wrote it, then she'd be a false prophet. And I don't believe she wrote it like this. I believe she wrote it the way I read it. It's just a copyist error accidentally, or maybe an editorial error where they thought this was more correct. So I want to go here. This is for the youth instructor. So this is ASTR. So it's the Office of Archives, Statistics, and Research, and it's for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they have they get a lot of information here. So it talks about the youth instructor. This is the magazine, and who the editors were. So James White. So James White is the one that actually created this magazine. He was the first editor, and then you have Anna White, and then you have James White. I believe this is Grace Amadon. You can get some names there that you're like, hey, I know those people. And then you get to Jenny R. Tremblay. And so the article was 1873. She edited from 1871 to 1873. But then there's another Jenny A. Miriam here, which was 1873 to 1875. So we have two Jennys being editors, both of them in the same year the quote was. But I think it might have been Jenny Tremblay. I'm not 100% sure. And there's something interesting here. And you can see here there's a Minerva Chapman as well. I just want to bring this into it's 1875 to 1879. And I'm going to show you something here. So here we get to another page. This is the periodicals for the youth instructor. And this just shows all the articles. Well, at first I thought it was all the articles. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So, it shows 1852, 1853, 1854, 1855. And then it goes, all of a sudden, boom, 1856 is gone. It's like, where did 1856 go? So I'm like, that's interesting. So what does 1855 look like? And they're like, oh, they actually made copies and scanned them in, and that's what it is. So it's like, well, maybe there's nothing for 1856. So let's just type in. So I typed in youth instructor 1856, and I thought, well, maybe it's just not something Ellen White wrote. But it's like, dear children, and then you can read it and you know it's her writings. And then it's like Ellen White. She's the author in 1856. But in 1856, it never makes it here because they don't have the original scan for it. So you had Ellen White that wrote something, and then the newspaper wrote it, and then from the newspaper they took it and put it into the youth instructor book. So it's kind of like the telephone game where all of a sudden you pass on and you pass on, you pass on, and then things might have changed, and we don't know actually who might have made the error. So here you see we can go downward to 1872, and all of a sudden you have all these missing years for both those Jennys plus that other man. We're missing all the original articles for it. We just have what was in the book Youth Instructor, but we don't have anything for the magazines which Ellen White wrote for, which made it into the book. So that's kind of interesting. So I just want to go back here, and we're just going to look at a little bit at Jenny Tremblay's life. We can't find very much on Jenny. This other Jenny here, I think that's a Jenny Miriam, but this is Miriam. But this Jenny here had 2 R's in her name, so it's not the same person. And there was things going on in her life which might have made it easier to make a slight mistake. And I don't want to single her out, but she's the only person I could actually find anything on. So I just want to look at it and just see that, there was things going on in her life, and it might have made it easier to make a little mistake like that, which happens to all of us. If anybody follows me, and when I read, and it might even happen here, when I watch my videos later, I'm like, where in the world how did I come up with that? How did I say it? Often when I'm reading, I'm dyslexic, so I might say things backwards. I might actually take a passage like this, flip it over here, and read this first and read that last. I usually just flip a word or two. It happens more when I'm tired. But when I read too, I'll be reading, and my eyes will be down here, but my mouth will still be talking up here. So that causes problems with sometimes when I read. So hence why I like to put up every quote for people to follow along on their own and go, that's not what it said. So at least you know what it said. In my mind, I know what it says, but what actually comes out of my mouth might not always be the same thing. So it says, in regard to Jenny Tremblay, we hope that Jenny, Miriam, and Adelaide will not hold themselves aloof from Jenny Tremblay. It's like, oh, what's going on with Jenny? So this is 1872, right? So it's in the middle of her being the editor. It says, we believe her to be a sincere Christian, but not perfect. It's like, oh, somebody was questioning whether she was even a Christian or not. All of you sit down and together have a friendly talk over the matter. Don't get up an excited feeling. Keep calm and composed. Edson and you can have double the influence you would if you should get into an excitement. You are in danger of not always viewing things correctly and of feeling too strongly when you think things are not just right. Jenny Tremblay pursues a singular course, but keep cool, work on yourself as best you can, and do not build too many air castles. So my guess as to what an air castle is you make a castle where you have everything stored up and you have all your walls fortified, but an air castle just means that anybody can just walk right through it because it's just things built up in your mind that aren't actually real or solid. So here, obviously, there's something going on. Ellen White's encouraging some people to encourage Jenny Tremblay along. And then we see something that happens here in a little bit. And this is 1874, so she's no longer the editor, but we're going to see she's still working at the office. It says, Jenny Tremblay was married yesterday to Mr. Richards, who was in Trail Institute. No one knew that they were to be married till it was done. It's like, oh, she kept it. Why did she keep it a secret? Right? Because they're all friends. They're all working together, or at least we think so. And it says, he is an unbeliever. And you're like, oh, that's why. Especially if you're working for James White and Ellen White, and you're like, hey, you're yoked up with an unbeliever? But Jenny says he's investigating the truth. She still works at the office. He left town after the marriage, and Jenny went to work. Okay, so, yeah, that's all it says. We don't have any dirt on anybody. We see some things that, might have been, in her life that uh, might have made a difference and might have made a slight clerical error this way, or she might have done it just because everyone believes it to be that way. She might have just thought Ellen White just was tired writing late at night and just flipped them around. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. But there's nothing else. I can't find anything in the Pioneer writings or anywhere else on these people. And hopefully, Jenny's husband investigated the truth, became a believer, and they just continued on and did fine work. But I just can't find anything on it. So I have no idea. History can be interesting, and I'd love to have an idea, but we just don't. So this is not a hill I would die on for saying that this is for sure Ellen White saying this, because for me, if you say that, then she has to be a false prophet. And I'd love to see the original paper that she gave to Jenny to actually put in the article for the magazine. But I don't think that's possible unless somebody from the Ellen White estate actually watches this, goes and finds it, and then comes out and shows what is actually true, which is good. Okay, that would be nice to see. Okay, now that we've looked at that, let's just take a look at a few more Ellen White quotes, and we're going to bring this all together to show that one Ellen White quote is in complete contradiction to the Bible, as we've already seen, and it's in contradiction to more of Ellen White's writings. She says, before Egypt was visited by this terrible judgment, the word of the Lord came unto the fathers and mothers among the Israelites, directing them to gather their children with them into their house, there to remain until the destroying angel had passed over the land. Okay? Remember, we said, how long was it? It was over the whole night. Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, draw out and take ye a lamb according to your families, and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians when he seeth the blood on the lintel and on the side posts, and the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. The children of Israel did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they were commanded, don't go out of your houses. And she says, and they did as he commanded. Okay, so it should be 100% obvious now that they did not go out that night. The Bible tells us clearly that they left that night. So it's clearly showing that they left on the 15th day at night, which the Bible specifically tells us that they did. And it was not the same day. Let's read a little bit more. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt. For there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up, and get ye forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go and serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take of your flocks and of your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste. For they said, We all be dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, and kneaded troughs before being bound up in their clothes and upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. And they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. Okay, so common sense. Just common sense, people. If your child is dead and somebody comes into you and saying, Hey, can you give me stuff? You haven't even buried your child, and you're looking at these people, and it's because of these people that your child's dead. Are you going to give them stuff, or are you just going to like be in such a rage that you would kill them? Think about that. Okay, almost everyone here, right? Unless, well, maybe not. Christians would never think to kill another person, but a lot of people would. When you were still unconverted and not following God, what would your emotions have been, knowing that these people are coming in, asking to borrow stuff from you, knowing that because of them that your child just died? Okay, they needed some time to cool down. So a good 24-hour period-ish or a 16-hour period-ish would be a perfect amount of time for that to happen, where there could be a fear instilled instead of an anger and a rage. Okay, so the Bible makes this clear. But I also wanted to bring in the manna into this too. So the Bible's clear. When the manna comes, it gives us all the details. We can take all the things that we know, and we must remember that the Sabbath was made for man, right? God cannot infringe on us on the Sabbath day. That would be him breaking his covenant, and that would be wrong, because then God would have to die. He would be a liar, and that's that. God does not lie. So people that believe that it was a Sabbath when Jericho's walls fell down and the people went in and destroyed all those people. Okay, that is so wrong. That just means that you believe that that man was made for the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was not made for man, because God would have to die if he did that. He would not exist. It would not be true. The Bible would be nothing. It would just be a fairy tale. And this is not what the Bible is, and we can see this just by how connected Ellen White's writings are to the Bible and how full and complete the Bible is. Okay, so I want to bring in a part here that's going to give us some information that is good for us to know for the manna. Okay, and it also helps us to have a little bit better understanding. I want to keep this video short, and it's already really long, so I'm only going to bring in a little bit. I'm not going to bring in all kinds of points I'd love to bring in, yet there's so much there. And as people look at this and believe the truth, if you choose to believe the truth instead of believing a lie, you'll find so much. It's beautiful. Okay. So Ellen White says, God commanded Moses to bring his people to the place of a natural solitude and sublimity, that they might hear his voice and receive the statute book of heaven. 50 days previous to this, the pillar of fire had lighted the path through the Red Sea. The whole congregation of Israel now encamped in the plain in full view of Mount Horeb. Then followed the days of preparation. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai to cherish an abiding sense of the holiness of God, whose voice they were soon to hear. So here it gives us a pinpoint of time. On the 15th day of the third month, we're told that 50 days before this, they crossed the Red Sea. Now, I love this quote because this shows that 8 days after they left Egypt, they were baptized in the Red Sea. And I say that because 8 is a number that represents baptism, it represents circumcision, and it's a beautiful number. And God just connects it all. It's just beautiful. So this is what I call God's calendar. I call it the King James Bible calendar. This is what God shows in the Bible, what actually sets a Sabbath. Every time there's a new moon, it resets the Sabbath every month, and every month looks identical. And the Sabbath is always on the 8th day of the month, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. Okay, this is just what the Bible teaches. This is what Ellen White's teaching right now, as we're going to see. And it's just beautiful. But we're going to ignore this calendar for now, sort of. We're going to pretend that this here is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we're going to pretend that right here is Saturday for demonstration purposes only, okay? Okay, so we're going to read about the manna, because when we read about the manna, this is going to give the beautiful context to show when the Sabbath day actually is, that it helps us to see that it goes over a span of 2 days, and it actually follows the new moon. And this is just beautiful. So we're going to start Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 16. This is when the manna falls. And we're going to go over this, and we're going to see how this all works out. And it says, "And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month." So they came in the 15th day of the second month. Now remember this. They journeyed at this time and came there at this time, and there's something interesting to be seen here. "And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God that we have died by the hand of the Lord in Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and we did eat the bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth unto this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will bring bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I might prove them whether they will walk in my law or not." So he says, I'm going to rain bread from heaven. This is the manna. He's right. And the people are going to go out and gather a certain rate every day, and that God's going to test them on this. So he says, I'm going to test them on this, whether they will walk in my law or not. So what law is he talking about here? And it says, "And it shall come to pass on the 6th day you shall prepare that which you bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." So he's saying, I'm going to rain bread from heaven, you're going to gather it, and on the 6th day you're going to gather a double portion, twice as much. "And Moses and Aaron said unto the children of Israel, At even you shall know that the Lord hath brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he heareth your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that you murmur against us?" And Moses says, "This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord heareth your murmurings which ye murmur against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord." So it says, in the evening, he's going to give you flesh to eat. So they're going to have flesh that night when the evening comes. "And Moses spake unto Aaron, saying unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he hath heard your murmurings." Okay, so it says, "And it came to pass, as Moses spake, the whole congregation of the children of Israel, as they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud." So the glory of the Lord's appearing in the cloud. They're all listening. "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, At even ye shall eat flesh." So at even, when evening comes, they're going to eat flesh. And in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord. So here it's setting up that at even, so when the sun sets, they're going to get flesh to eat. And in the morning is a new day, and it's going to be the first day of the week, and they're going to have the manna start, and it's going to come for 6 days, and then it's going to be a Sabbath. So it's still on the Sabbath day that the flesh is coming, but it's at even that all this flesh comes, and it will be the next morning when the manna comes. And it came to pass that at even the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host. And when the dew was that that lay up was gone, behold, the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as a hoarfrost on the ground. So here it's just showing that at even the quails came, and they baked and they cooked and they did everything, right? So this is the Sabbath day, okay? This is still part of the Sabbath day. But it's not a part of the Sabbath rest period that spanned from the preparation day to the Sabbath day. So at even, the quails came up, and even is just a period between light and darkness. That's all it is. And it was in the morning that the manna came. When the dew that was lay up was gone up, behold, the face of the wilderness, there lay a small round thing, as small as a hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, It is manna, for they knew it's not what it was. And Moses said unto them, This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord commanded. Gather every man according to his eating, an omer for every man according to the number of your persons. Take ye every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered some more and some less. And when they did meet with an omer, he that gathereth much had nothing over, and he that gathereth little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. And Moses said, Let no man leave it until the morning. But notwithstanding they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank, and Moses was wroth with them. Okay, so the manna, the bread of heaven, the bread of life, is also the Bible. It is the holy manna. And we're to take the manna, we're supposed to eat it every day and think about what we've read and not just leave it until the morning because we'll forget it. It will breed worms and stink. There's just beautiful things that God's also teaching us here, that if you see something in the Bible, search it out. Don't leave it until the morning because you'll forget. It'll breed worms, stink, and and God won't be happy because he's like, I gave you something to understand and you just left it. I'm trying to show you something new every day for your benefit, to give you strength. Okay, let's read on. And they gathered it every morning according to the man, according to his eating, when the sun waxed hot, it melted. So they gathered it every morning. And it came to pass on the 6th day. So on the 6th day of their gathering, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said unto him, This is what the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe which you will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. And they laid it up until the morning, and as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. So they had already prepared it. So they had already got all their food, they prepared it, they baked, they seethed, they did what they needed to do with it. And they laid that part up until the morning because they had a double portion on that day. And sometimes that's what happens. God gives you so much information, especially on preparation day, and you do what you can with it. And then you have to lay it aside because the night cometh when no man can work. And then you lay it up until the morning, and then it still will be a blessing unto you. And Moses says, Eat that today, for it is a Sabbath unto the Lord. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, and they found none. And the Lord has said unto Moses, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? Okay, so Moses had taught them about the Sabbath. We've seen that. They knew that they were supposed to bake and gather it and do all the cooking before the Sabbath, and they weren't supposed to do any of that on the Sabbath. So when the quail came, it's pretty interesting. They hadn't come in to the valley yet, by the look of it, unless they only traveled a super short distance, like a kilometer or half a kilometer. But it looks like the quail came On the 15th day at even, when they're complaining, they ate all the quail, and then it's a perfect time for them to move and to set up camp between Elim and Sinai on that time, because God's like, hey, I'm not going to give you any more flesh to eat. Eat what you have, leave all the bones and the guts and the feathers there. We're going to have nothing to remind you of that. We're going to move and we're going to set up camp in a new spot, and I'm going to give you the bread of heaven, the bread of life, the manna. And this is what I want you to remember, and I want you to forget about the quail. Ellen White says this about it. At nightfall, the camp was surrounded by vast flocks of quail, enough to supply the entire company. So it was at nightfall when this was all completely finished. So this shows some really beautiful things, but it shows us that it was on the 15th day of the second month that was a Sabbath, and on the 16th day, which was the next morning, was the time that the manna came, showing and setting the time of the Sabbath. We know the 15th of the month is when they came, was the second month is when they arrived, and we know that the manna started on the 16th, and then we know that the 22nd was the Sabbath, so that means that these 4 dates for sure are the Sabbath, and the new moon is what set it, but we're just going to ignore that for now. We also were given the information that 50 days previous to this time is when they crossed the Red Sea, okay? So let's just say there was 30 days, and I want to say 29 days in this month. So 29 plus 15 is 44. So then you have 44, and then you have 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. So you have here, this could be it. But it also said it was previous to this time. So do we count the 15th? Probably not. So it could also be here. And then there's also a possibility that this day was only a 29-month calendar too, because that happens sometimes. We have 29 days, 29 days, 30 days. It's not perfectly even set. So this is where I believe they crossed the Red Sea. And the reason being is that when they were baptized in the Red Sea, baptism is the same as circumcision, and children were supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day. Okay? Now, this is something that's interesting. Okay? So we're going to take a little bit more information that we have. We know that the 14th was the Passover. We know that they did no work from the 14th that whole night. And then during the day of the 15th is just a blank, and it says nothing. Okay? But we know that they left the next day. So we know that they did a 3-day journey into the wilderness. So you have 1, 2, 3-day journey into the wilderness, and then all of a sudden Pharaoh's people are like, hey, they're not coming back, they're fleeing, right? So all of a sudden you know that they're traveling this day as well. Okay, so we have 4 days that we know cannot be, we're going to say, Saturday. So if these days can't be Saturday on this calendar, because this is just showing a 7-day repeating cycle, then we know that this can't be Sabbath. We know that these can't be Sabbath. We know that these can't be Sabbath. And we know that, okay? So we have that information. So with that information, now we go and we look at when the manna came. So we know that the manna came on the 16th day, which means that the 17th day and the 18th, the 19th and 20th and the 21st day, all those days could not be the Sabbath, right? So if we're going to say the Sabbath is Saturday, all those days can't be Saturday. Okay. Now, when we get to here, we have to say that the new moon day is Saturday. So we pretend that that's Saturday. So with all this information now, if we say this is Saturday, we have to go back on God's calendar here, and let's just do it with a 30-day month first. So if that was Saturday, then this would have to be Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Sunday, and all of a sudden you have here Saturday. Well, that doesn't work, does it, whatsoever? Because if they were fleeing Egypt on these days here, right, we know for 3 days like that this cannot be Sabbath, because the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, God would not ever break his covenant with us. But man will break his with God, but God won't break his with us. He cannot ask us to move and work on those days. Okay, so let's just look at it this way. If this is Saturday and this is now, say this is Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, Sunday, Saturday, right? Here, you can't get out of it. 1 week before, they were fleeing Egypt. So it would be impossible. The manna shows without a doubt it is impossible for Saturday to be the Sabbath. But when you have God's calendar, let's just erase all this stuff here. You have the Sabbath, Sabbath, not Sabbath, new moon, but it resets the Sabbath, which sets the Sabbath, 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 and you never ever break anything. And the fascinating thing is here, it's the 50 days the 50 days. So if you count 8 days from the Sabbath, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This 50 days is when they were baptized through the Red Sea on the 8th day after the Sabbath. It just kind of makes sense. So when we take this and bring this all together, it is clear to see that the Sabbath day encompasses a span of 2 days. It's clear to see that the 14th day and the 15th day were the Sabbath, and we can see that this is always continually, according to the manna, always the same thing too. You always have that same time period. So the manna shows for sure that it's impossible for the Sabbath to be Saturday, that it's impossible to be Sunday, and it's not going to be any other day because it just keeps on continuing this way. And there's 3 plain thus saith the Lord's in the Bible. I'm going to bring them out. I guess I have to do a part 3 to this that will bring this all into play, and then the Sabbath will be as obvious as leaves on a tree in the wintertime. If there's leaves on a tree in the wintertime, you can definitely see it because that tree stands out, and so does the Sabbath. It's my prayer that we'll be humble because pride goeth before a fall. And we know, as from that very first quote that I read, that multitudes are going to be blown away as leaves in the autumn. And I just pray that we're not blown away like leaves in the autumn, that we're still on this tree in the wintertime that clings to its leaves, because that tree is Jesus Christ. And cling and hang on, because it is so beautiful and it is so nice. And while everything else around us looks so desolate and so bare, God is still with us. Jesus is hanging on to us. And it's my prayer that we'll search our Bibles with new eyes, looking and reading and searching for this hidden treasure that's there, as people that actually have a relationship with Jesus Christ, who is the Word of God.